Nuclear weapons are the ultimate metric of a powerful nation in the 21st century, wielding a formidable shadow that casts palpable tension across nations. Currently, only 9 nations are on that elite list, namely the US, Russia, India, Pakistan, North Korea, Israel, France, the UK, and last but by no means least, China. China, as the up-and-coming world power, is by far and away the most interesting member of this list, and yet, despite the inherent interest to the story and the deep-reaching geopolitical ramifications their possession of nuclear weapons raises, the story of how they came about them is one that's often overlooked and neglected in Western reporting. So today, we're going to right that wrong. This is the very story of China's nuclear arsenal. China's path to nuclear weapons began in the 1950s when the country was eager to throw off the shackles of the century of humiliation and assert itself as a great power. Now, there are many ways that a nation could do this, but chief among them, Mao reasoned, was through the acquisition of a nuclear arsenal. But how to achieve this goal? Developing nuclear weapons is no small matter, and for China, there was only one answer: enlist the help of their ideologically aligned friend north of the border, the Soviet Union. The Soviets found this proposition agreeable. After all, they were keen to see as much of the map turn red as possible, and so they formally began cooperating with China on all things nuclear in the mid-1950s, pouring technical equipment, knowledge, and experts into the country, as well as establishing the Institute of Atomic Energy in Beijing, a nucleus for training China's first generation of atomic scientists, as well as numerous uranium processing facilities. Now, unfortunately, this cooperation was not long for the world, as despite both being communist nations, they both had radically different interpretations of Marxism and how it should be implemented. This, along with more pragmatic disputes over borders and leadership of the communist world, eventually came to a head in 1960 when the two nations formally severed diplomatic relations with one another in what would become known as the Sino-Soviet split. The breakup had massive repercussions for China because as the Soviets left, they took their scientists with them, formally ending Soviet-Chinese nuclear cooperation. However, China's leaders weren't going to let years of progress go to waste. The foundation laid by the Soviets, though interrupted, had already set China on a path from which there was no turning back. They had the scientists, they had the facilities, all they had to do was finish the job. It also didn't hurt that they had espionage on their side, and although it is hotly debated by historians just how much espionage contributed to the completion of the Chinese bomb, it is certain that to some degree the Soviets were still assisting with the project whether they knew it or not. All things considered, things went rather well after the split, and after just a few more years of work, China had done it and completed its own atomic bomb. All that was left now was to test it. Alright, so it was the 16th of October 1964, and in the vast remote stretches of China's Lopner Desert, Project 596, China's first nuclear test, was about to begin. In the cool, pre-dawn hours, technicians clad in their protective gear scurried about, double-checking every connection and every gauge. The desert, usually a silent witness to the passage of time, seemed to pause, its hush interrupted intermittently by the hum of equipment and the murmurs of those awaiting the appointed hour. 3 p.m. marked the moment of truth. With the push of a button, the vast desert was alight with an ethereal brilliance, the ground quaking under the sheer force of the explosion. China had triumphantly heralded its arrival into the nuclear club. Boasting a yield of 22 kilotons, the explosion's blast was on par with that had wrought devastation on Nagasaki in 1945. This test sent a clear message globally. China was no longer to be sidelined or to be underestimated. They were now among the elite. So, well, what was next for China? The immediate concern was putting the bomb into serial production, but in the longer term, another even more explosive goal came to the fore: a hydrogen bomb and the exponentially greater yields that they produced. And the need couldn't be more pressing, as the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom had already built such bombs, testing them in 1952, 1955, and 1957 respectively, and so, dutifully, China's atomic scientists got to work. And let's see how they got on with that. Now, the road to China's hydrogen bomb was plagued with hurdles and potholes. The leap was not a mere incremental step, it was a quantum jump.
Atomic bombs, with their reliance on fission to shatter atomic nuclei, paled in comparison to hydrogen bombs, which tapped into the enormous energy of fusion, the very process that powers the sun.
But while the road to the hydrogen bomb may have been plagued with obstacles, it was one that was easy enough to traverse. As a mere 32 months after Project 596, the skies above Lopnor test site illuminated with a terrifying brilliance once again, as on the 17th of July 1967, China detonated its first hydrogen bomb in what it called Test Number 6. The test went off without a hitch and yielded a blast of around 3.3 megatons, a force over 150 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. For comparison, this was significantly smaller than the US's first hydrogen bomb, Ivy Mike, which had a yield of 10.4 megatons, but somewhat larger than the USSR's and the UK's first examples, which both yielded more or less 3 megatons. In addition to the development of the bombs themselves, China also spent the late 1960s refining its missile delivery mechanisms. During the embryonic stages of its nuclear program, China had predominantly leaned on nuclear bombers such as the H-6 for such purposes. Given the bomber's propensity for being shot down, though, the rationale behind improving their missiles was obvious. The limitations of China's early missiles were exemplified by the Dongfeng 2, China's first nuclear-capable missile. First tested in 1966, this was only an intermediate-range ballistic missile with a maximum range of 1,250 kilometers. It was also inaccurate and used a complicated fuel system that slowed swift deployment, a far cry from the whole end-all life on Earth at the push of a button type of deterrent that one pictures when imagining nuclear weapons. Thus, the Dongfeng missile series underwent a pivotal transformation. Most notable is the development and deployment of the Dongfeng 5, or DF-5, China's first intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM. Tested throughout the 1970s and finally put into service in 1981, it was capable of delivering a 3-megaton warhead over a distance of 12,000 kilometers with an accuracy of 1 to 200 meters. China also upped its nuclear testing, conducting numerous tests aimed at both validating its designs and showcasing its nuclear prowess on the international stage. Exempling the latter is Test Number 21, conducted on the 17th of November 1976, China's largest ever test. Launched using a prototype DF-5 and producing a yield of 4 megatons, the aim of this test was simple. It was to say, look how big our missile-mounted bombs can be. But exampling the former, more scientific approach is Test Number 8, conducted on the 27th of December 1968. Dropped from an H-6 bomber, this test's aim was to confirm the viability of plutonium as a reaction accelerant, which, given its yield of 3 megatons, it absolutely did. In its ascension to major nuclear power, China also had to figure out its doctrines for when to use its weapons. Now, this is harder than it may first seem. Present yourself as too trigger-happy, and rather than keeping the enemy at bay, you risk telling the world that you are little more than a rabid dog that needs to be put down. But on the flip side, present yourself as a pacifist who would never ever push the button, and you make your deterrence completely ineffectual. China balanced this delicate dichotomy with the implementation of a no first use, or NFU, policy in the 1960s. And this was exactly what it sounds like. No tricks or asterisks that hide a more menacing machination, just a nice simple, don't shoot at us and we won't shoot at you. China maintains its NFU policy to this day, but while the Chinese attitude didn't change, the real-world ramifications of it did as their nuclear technology improved and more countries came into range. For example, what use was the policy against the United States in the 1960s when the country was out of range? The US would be free to bathe China in atomic fire and pay no heed to the threats of retribution, thus rendering the policy moot. But with the coming of the DF-5, which put the mainland US firmly in range, suddenly that threat of Beijing returning the favor if they launched became a much greater point of focus for US defense planners. So, as the Cold War reached its end, China found itself wielding a formidable and modernized nuclear arsenal of 160 warheads. So, what came next? To answer that question, in a nutshell, is more warheads, further refinement of delivery systems, and a strategic expansion of its capabilities. The Cold War may have ended, but China was no fool. It knew that there were a great many powerful countries that weren't exactly its fans, and so all efforts now went into making sure that it maintained its nuclear edge into the 21st century. For China's missiles, this meant not only extending their ranges, but also improving their accuracy, maneuverability, resistance to interception, and above all else, their lethality. This need saw the development of multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, or MIRVs, a missile that flies into space and then launches multiple warheads rather than just flying to its target and then blowing up. Many such missiles emerged from this drive, and the whole DF-5 cache was upgraded with such capabilities, but let's focus on the Dongfeng 41 or DF-41 and the Julang 3 or JL-3. The DF-41 was introduced in 2017, and it appears to be an ICBM MIRV with the capability to launch up to 10 250-kiloton warheads. It can be road-launched, and it's assumed that it can be launched also from static silos. It also has a range of up to 15,000 kilometers, bringing nearly the entire globe into range. The JL-3 is an ICBM MIRV introduced in 2022. It appears able to launch 3 warheads and have a range of 9,000 kilometers. Now, this might sound like a downgrade compared to the DF-41, but there is one extra detail that makes its humbler capabilities make sense, and, well, that's that it can fit in submarines. We haven't discussed China's submarines yet, largely because they have been but a footnote in the story until now, but with China plowing significant resources into them as part of its post-Cold War modernization, let's now pay them a little bit of heed. China only really had a single ballistic missile submarine. That's a submarine that can launch nuclear missiles during the Cold War, a Type 92 dubbed Xia that was commissioned in 1983. It was noisy, it was crude, and it didn't carry many missiles, and all in all it was just a bit shit. But all of that changed with the coming of the Type 094, first commissioned in 2004 and with 8 planned by 2005. It is everything the Xia wasn't. Its nuclear reactor is powerful and silent, it has all the modern gadgets, and it can carry up to 12 JL-3 missiles. Parallel to that, the air component has also seen a radical transformation since the end of the Cold War. The venerable H-6 bomber, for example, has a new variant, the H-6N, which has had its bomb bay removed entirely in favor of having mounted air-launched nuclear missiles, allowing it to strike targets from long, safe distances. But even this may soon prove obsolete, as in 2016, China announced the development of the X-20, a nuclear-capable stealth bomber with an intercontinental range that will carry 10 tons of nuclear ordnance, and according to Chinese state media, it is imminently due to take its maiden flight. Now, the post-Cold War world has also seen China change its nuclear politics. It still maintains its NFU policy, but has become much more proactive with engaging with the world on all matters nuclear. For example, in 1992, it finally signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT. The NPT, an international agreement first penned in 1968, aims to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and weapons technology, to foster the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, and to further the goal of disarmament. The treaty establishes 3 main pillars: the prevention of the spread of nuclear weaponry, non-proliferation, the promotion of peaceful uses of nuclear energy, cooperation, and the pursuit of nuclear disarmament. These are to be pursued in a manner that safeguards against the diversion of nuclear energy from peaceful uses to nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices, and signatories agree not to share their nuclear technologies with non-nuclear weapon states and to work toward nuclear disarmament and the eventual elimination of their nuclear arsenals. Similarly, China also signed the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, or CTBT, in 1996. The CTBT is a multilateral treaty that forbids all nuclear explosions for both civilian and military purposes in all environments. The treaty is notable for its establishment of a global verification mechanism to ensure compliance, involving a vast network of seismic, hydroacoustic, infrasound, and radionucleotide sensors, a mechanism which China fully supports and hosts on its soil. Furthermore, China has also demonstrated an evolving posture toward on-the-ground international cooperation and engagement, particularly in the realm of inspections. Embracing a more participative stance, China is engaged with multinational weapons inspectors and initiatives, including those steered by the United Nations. This engagement is viewed through the lens of a broader, collective approach to international security and disarmament, and signifies China's calculated integration into the global security apparatus. The participation in, and in some instances, endorsement of international inspection regimes is indicative of China's nuanced shift from an isolated nuclear strategy to one that is more entwined with global non-proliferation and disarmament objectives. Now, this almost sounds a bit hypocritical because, lest we forget, this greater openness around its nuclear weapons has occurred at the exact same time as China is enormously expanding and modifying its nuclear arsenal, but sadly, that is just the name of the game. Most nuclear-armed countries do and have done this. For example, the US and Russia have long participated in disarmament talks and treaties like the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty while maintaining extensive nuclear modernization programs. It's an unfortunate geopolitical reality. Everybody would like a non-nuclear world, but achieving that proves significantly harder than the well-meaning emotion behind it. Only 3 countries have ever gone the whole way and fully abolished their nuclear arsenal: Kazakhstan, South Africa, and Ukraine, with that last example also currently being a great example of why nuclear disarmament may not always be such a good idea. So, the story of China's nuclear weapons has been one of tentative beginnings, careful expansion, and meticulous long-term strategic planning, and now, having successfully navigated through that intricate landscape equal parts technological and geopolitical, it now undoubtedly stands as one of the nuclear big boys of the world. So, now we're left with the question, what does the future hold? And to answer that, it really appears that it's just more of the same. China, in various recent press releases, has made it quite apparent that it intends to continue expanding and modernizing its nuclear forces, and Western analysts don't think they're lying. A report released by the Stockholm Peace Research Institute in January 2023 believes that China will soon possess upward of 400 warheads and is on track to possess 1,500 of them by 2035. The report also points to the imminent completion of the H-20 bomber and the eventual completion of the Type 096 submarine, the successor to the Type 094. This is evidence that they have no intention of breaking from form anytime soon. Whatever it may hold, we aren't going to uniquely decry China, particularly not when Russia and the US, despite making all the same noises about moving towards disarmament as China, possess just under 6,000 and just over 5,000 warheads respectively. It is simply an unpleasant reality that for so long as geopolitics remains as it is, the great powers of the world will feel the need to stockpile nuclear weapons. All we can do, when considering the future, is pray that that situation eventually changes and that no one is stupid enough to push the button.